Hello and welcome. South Africa is at the crossroads again. In just over 3 weeks, the country heads to the polls for what many regard as a major test for the relatively young democracy. 28 political parties will be contesting the election. At stake are 400 seats in the National Assembly and 90 seats in the National Council of Provinces. Those two houses together make up the South African Parliament. The political landscape has changed significantly in South Africa in the last few months. Disgruntled members of the ANC, mainly supporters of former President Thabo Mbeki, broke away to form a new political party called COPE, for Congress of the People. And the ANC leader, Jacob Zuma, who's likely to become the next president, has some dark clouds hanging over his candidacy. He faces graft charges and is seen as a very divisive figure in South Africa. On today's show, we take a look at the future of South Africa as the election approaches. Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room, and then take part. We also welcome your phone calls on the show, of course. Joining me today from Johannesburg, the renowned South African journalist and political commentator, Alistair Sparks. He's the author of a number of books on South Africa's transition from apartheid to a fully fledged democracy, and the founder of the Institute for the Advancement of Journalism in South Africa. Alistair, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Hi. Now, looking ahead to the election that comes up later this month in South Africa, here's how the president of the Africa Policy Institute, Dr. Peter Kajwanya, this is how he described it. He says the 2009 election takes place as the country slides from the age of hope to the age of despair. That doesn't sound very promising. Is it a fair characterization?
I certainly wouldn't categorize it that way. I find it very encouraging. I think we had a lot of euphoria at the start of our democracy, but we have been effectively a one-party state until now, and I think we are now seeing a change in our whole political landscape, moving towards a proper multi-party democracy, with increasingly after this election, not at this election, but after this election, we will have a real prospect of regime change through the ballot box. And I think that is an extremely healthy development and very far from being a state of despair.
So there's no likelihood of the ANC losing its majority after this election, but will that majority be significantly reduced?
Yes, at the moment the ANC controls 70% of the parliamentary seats. I think that will be cut to 60, even lower. And again, it is not only a parliamentary election, we are having elections also for the legislatures in 9 of our provinces. And at least one of those, I believe, will go to the opposition parties. And I think that there will be strong oppositions to the ANC in 2 or 3 of the other provinces as well. And then come 2011, we're going to have local elections. And I think we'll see a number of our major cities move into new hands, new control by other parties, because I think we are likely to see an amalgamation of opposition parties. From this scattergun collection of 28 parties, I think we will find one major coalition emerging out of that lot. And all of that I find very healthy and encouraging.
Well, I'm joined now on the set by Gerald Lamel, Executive Director of Africa Action, based here in Washington, D.C. That's an organization that works for political and social justice in Africa. Mr. Lamel, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Are you also very hopeful, as our guest in South Africa was saying, that there would be more diversity in South African politics, which would probably lead to a healthier political climate there?
I think that, yeah, in the future, it's certainly not going to happen in this election. I mean, the big issue that ANC supporters are pushing right now is the question of poverty. And the fact that the Mbeki wing of the ANC, which is now largely COPE, Congress for the People, did not really address the issue of poverty or jobs or crime in poor communities. And that their emphasis on foreign direct investment and making things palatable for Western and Eastern businesses has interfered with some of the promises that were made and initially believed in. And Jacob Zuma is believed to be more of a man of the people. He's more leftist, certainly in his manifestos. And I think the perception is that Cope and Bishop Dandala will not be able to deliver on these issues.
So, after the election, do you see a significant shift to the left in South Africa?
You know, from our context down in South Africa, the perception is no. The perception is that Jacob Zuma actually has very strong ties to the business community. It's just different ones than perhaps Thabo Mbeki had. I think that poor people are still going to suffer, and they're still going to struggle. It sounds in the rhetoric sounds good, but we will see. I think the jury is still out as to whether the ANC is going to be able to deliver in changing the economy for poor people.
Alistair, I want to get back to you. I've been listening to your words of optimism about what could happen in South Africa after this election, but looking at it here from the United States, South Africa appears to be a country that is riven by ethnic tensions and a country where some democratic institutions appear to be coming under attack. We've heard the Constitutional Court in South Africa and the judiciary in general coming under attack, being called counter-revolutionary. Is that just election rhetoric, or is there a serious threat to South Africa's democratic institutions?
Well, I think there are two questions in what you've just put to me. Firstly, I don't think there is really ethnic conflict showing itself. I think there is increasingly class conflict. I think what is happening in South Africa with the rapid emergence of a black middle class is that we are beginning to get a class restratification, beginning to overlay the old racial stratification of our society. On the second point, yes, Jacob Zuma is under a heavy cloud of suspicion and scandal. He's facing charges that essentially say that over 10 years between 1995 and 2005, he received 783 bribe payments of various kinds. Now, one way or another, there's been a major assault on the prosecuting authority, heavy pressure on the judiciary, and I think within days we are likely to see the prosecuting authority withdrawing all those charges. And there will be all kinds of allegations to justify their doing that. So yes, some of our institutions have come under severe threat. I don't think they're about to crumble, but they have been damaged. As far as the economy is concerned, I think one has to take note of the fact that we are entering this election in the midst of a major global economic recession. So the chances of Jacob Zuma and his new administration being able to deliver jobs, which he's been promising in a very populist fashion, are not only remote, I think it's wishful thinking. I think we are likely to have an increase in unemployment, and the poor are going to be worse off, not because of him, but because of the global situation that we confront.
Gerald Lamel, what will the world make of that if those charges against Jacob Zuma are dropped?
Well, I'm sure they're going to believe that the ANC was wielding its power over the judiciary. The South African judiciary is known for being very independent, yet there have been charges and countercharges of untoward influence. In fact, that was part of the impetus for getting Thabo Mbeki forced out of the presidency. So I think the world will, I believe that countries like the United States are looking with some suspicion at Jacob Zuma, and I think any opportunity that they get to question him, I think they're going to take up.
Okay, Alistair, we've received an SMS message here from Zambia, and the viewer asks this question: what is the way forward for South Africa if Zuma wins this election?
Well, he'll become president, obviously, so he will lead a new administration. I don't myself believe that there will be any major shift in economic policies. I think the South African government will probably become more inward-looking, less ambitious in its in the kind of thrust towards the rest of Africa, with Thabo Mbeki's visions of an African renaissance, and really engaging with other countries in Africa to the same degree. I think particularly given the economic climate that Zuma will find himself operating in, that we are going to see a much more inward-looking government, grappling with the problems of unemployment and of economic recession, all of which, of course, could aggravate the crime rate. We have a collapsing Zimbabwe to the north of us. We're likely to have more immigrants, refugees, really, economic refugees flooding into the country from there. So he's going to be facing an awful lot of problems, and I don't think he's going to be able to lift his eyes in the same ambitious way of playing the role of the regional superpower that Mbeki certainly tried to play.
Gerald Lamel, if, as Alistair Sparks has been pointing out there, if there is no significant change or shift in economic policy, is it likely then that the ANC, and the government for that matter, could come under increasing pressure from its core constituency? Those are the vast majority of South Africans who come from the low-income group, who are very poor.
Oh, absolutely. I think the expectation are that Jacob Zuma will, is expected to deliver, and I think they will hold him to a very high standard. But I think what he has the opportunity to do, though, is to as Mr. Sparks says, I think he's going to look inwardly, but he can't. He has to look outward. He has to become engaged in the debate over the international financial system. He has to question issues like free market principles that have not worked anywhere else in the continent. We've seen a coup in Madagascar. We see problems throughout the continent where this has been implemented. He's got to start questioning this. He's got to start bringing regulations. He's got to start getting the state back responsible for uplifting people in the communities. He has a chance, and everybody across the continent has a chance to raise these questions and reject the structural adjustment programs and Western economic prescriptions that have caused so much poverty across the continent.
Well, gentlemen, still a lot more to talk about, but we are going to take a short break right now. More of our discussion with Alistair Sparks in Johannesburg and Gerald Lamel here in Washington. As we pause, let me remind you that you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see the debate taking place there right now. We'll be right back.